Good morning, everybody. Welcome to CW Jobs webinar, Future-Proofing Tech Hiring, Why Training Matters. Thanks for all joining today. We have nearly 150 registrants and we have numerous questions already supplied. So obviously a hot topic that people really want to hear about. This session is recorded and will be sent out after the webinar. So hopefully no cat on keyboard moments recorded for posterity. If you've got any questions, you'll see the chat function. If you put it through that, and my erstwhile colleagues will be able to supply those to me towards the end, which is something I'm really looking forward to, and not something I'm aiming towards getting as many of those questions answered. If you have any technical difficulties, please let us know through the chat, and we'll try and help you out on that side as well. Just for warning, there will be 3 polls throughout. So look out for those and please join in and let us know what's going on within your particular company or what your opinion is on maybe the questions asked. Okay, let's look at the agenda. So we'll be looking at what the current state of the techUK market is, why training is so important and should be an element of actually your hiring strategy. What are the challenges and what are the opportunities in 2021 in this particular area? And then towards the end, tips for basically building a fit-for-purpose training program and how to increase the return on investment when you are recruiting. Thankfully, I have 3 speakers to help me on this issue. I'll pass over to them first. So I've got Nimi Patel. Nimi, welcome.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Nimi Patel. I'm the Policy Manager for Skills, Talent and Diversity at techUK. For those of you that don't know, techUK is a trade association with over 830 members.
Nick, Director at Client Server.
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Nick Bolton. I'm a Director at Client Server. We are a technology recruitment consultancy and specialise in finding sort of tech talent for software houses, tech startups and consultancies.
And finally, but not least, Beth from Fujitsu.
Hi everyone, Beth Rowlands. I head up talent and skills for Fujitsu across Northern and Western Europe. We're an IT services integrator with about 20,000 people across Northern and Western Europe.
Thank you, everybody. For those that don't know, I'm Dominic Harvey. I'm the Sales Director at CW Jobs. We're an IT job board supplying tech talent to companies in the UK for the last 22 years. So Nimi's going to kick things off with us. She's going to be looking at what is happening in the current UK tech industry.
Thanks, Dom. I just wanted to briefly talk about the fact that as we come to the end of National Lockdown 3, more than 1.6 million people are currently out of work in the UK, and the unemployment rate has hit a 3-year high at 4.8%. Despite this, the UK tech sector continues to be strong. According to the Recruitment and Employment Federation, the number of active job postings in the UK topped 1 million in July, with a particular spike in job adverts for IT professionals. This is also shown by Tech Nation's Skills and Jobs report, which had tech as the 2nd highest vacancy rate in the summer between June and August. Only the health and social care professions were above that in terms of vacancies. But despite this, and I'm going to throw a few more stats at you, 62% of UK business executives say that their tech talent pool does not have the capability needed to deliver their digital strategy. New technologies such as AI and machine learning, which for a lot of us isn't actually new anymore, but for SMEs, they are. These require sort of specialist skills that the labour market is struggling to supply, which has led to kind of an intensification for competition and talent and an upward pressure on tech salaries, essentially. So that's why we're here today to discuss why investing in tech training is crucial. Something that's highlighted from CW Jobs' research into tackling tech training is the fact that we need to do more in this area, and that's something that Dom will go into.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into what are the details on the particular job roles, etc. As Nimi alluded to, tech has remained relatively strong. There was the initial seismic shock that everybody suffered end of March, April, and probably into May. where people were desperately running around and getting their remote working strategies on board. And in fact, if you look just at the beginning of the summer, the average application rate per role spiked at something like 22, 23 from CW, which is unheard of. But it just goes to show that even the tech community were beginning to get a little bit nervous and looking for different roles. It maybe even had been made redundant. That's now stabilised back to between 10 and 12 per vacancy. But if you look at the Q1 of this year compared to the end of last year, it's continued to grow at pace, so it's up a third. Software development is the main area. I think there were a few people taken off of projects, put onto kind of crisis management initially, but those projects very much seem to be back on track, and that's why the development side is booming again, up 2/3 there. Cybersecurity has ever gaps in the security piece, given the amount of people working remotely, is an even more important topic, and there is already a real dearth of cybersecurity professionals as well, and understandably. Support roles, people helping out, maybe people less skilled in dealing with their laptops and tech issues and the various tools. So that's been hugely in demand as well. So equally, we see a 10% increase in applications for the same period, showing that tech workers are still active and focused on making their next career move. Despite restrictions being in place, we've seen increased competition for demand for specialised tech candidates and a high number of applications for sub-disciplines like infrastructure support, architecture, DBAs and web development. So if we go to the next slide, something we did last year was the Turning to Tech campaign. It was becoming increasingly evident with the amount of people that were either furloughed or made redundant and looking for work, that people were reconsidering their careers, let's say. And one of the key stats we had out of it was 55% of workers thinking to change career would consider going into tech, according to the research. It really highlighted the key role played in our professional and personal lives that tech plays in that. And they cited more interest in work and greater job security as some of the reasons why they'd choose going into tech. But additionally, it became quite obvious that attracting candidates from all sorts of careers can not only help increase the talent pool, which is desperately in need of having that done to it, but also improve diversity in tech teams and ultimately close that skills gap. Remember, we've also got IR35 in the background, so flexible workers on the contract side were taken out of that equation as well. So everything really making it pretty painful to resolve your tech projects and get them to completion. So we'll launch the first poll of the webinar to get your thoughts on what your companies are doing. Do you believe your company provides adequate tech training to this resource? So have a look at that and see which one you think. It's a fairly straightforward question. Let's see what we think on that. So half of you saying that your company does provide adequate tech training, and the other half either no or not so sure. So yeah, that's quite 51%. I think is quite high, so that's a good sign. I'll pass over really to the guests that we have. Nick, Beth, why is training so important, apart from the obvious of knowing how to use the tools? But why is training so important?
Shall I go first, Nick?
Yeah,
so I was reflecting on this this morning, actually, Dom, and I remember seeing a stat which I came back to and picked out from Gartner. So they suggest that the number of skills that you're going to need for your job are going to increase year on year 10%. And they had another really interesting stat that 33% of the skills that were present in a job posting in 2017 are likely to now be out of date in 2021. So if you don't train within your organisation, you're going to have a workforce that are not going to be able to deliver for your customers, would be my answer.
Nick, how about yourself? I mean, there are a lot of retcons out there that would love to have, you know, some vacancies shown because of the skills gap that companies have. But you have a kind of closer alignment with the companies what you work with, don't you? And almost an advisory, collaborative role. What do you see?
Well, yeah. So it's interesting to see on that poll actually 20%. I think it was 20% of people saying that they're not sure whether their company offers relevant training, which that's quite concerning because I would have thought. Like it's one of the biggest draws for our clients, making sure they've got a training package that is attractive for who they're trying to employ, and also one that, as Beth rightly said, is relevant not just today, but for 2021, 2022, and sort of future-proofing their business. And I think the key for me in talking to clients and training is making sure that the training is relevant to what they're doing and not just a tick in the box or a specific certification because they feel they need it. It's more, working closely with heads of department, HR, whichever it might be, and making sure their sort of workforce is fit for purpose. And I think it's that's what we've seen the biggest change. It's quite employee-led because they know what the challenges they're facing, they know the issues they're sort of coming across, and it's tailoring that package and that training package to attract the best talent.
Yeah, and I think this sits behind it sometimes in that, well, we've bought all this stuff, so we need to train everybody. That's obvious, but actually, there's the additional side of it, isn't there? Where it isn't can be a huge draw, can put your company ahead of other companies because it's really highlighting the fact you have a strong training package and a commitment to upskilling the teams and the various departments for the future, which I think is often forgotten about because it's
important that they don't have it's there for a tick box exercise. It's there for like need our staff to look like to combat the rest of this year, which is obviously going to be a hybrid work from home office situation. And then going forward, how do we maintain them, retain them, and then also help them progress and stay in the business?
Yeah, obviously retention is a huge point as well, isn't it? That people don't feel that they're getting the training or there's better experiences elsewhere. It's another reason for them to go looking elsewhere, isn't it? So important not just to know the tools you're dealing with, but also to advertise the fact you're committed to your workforce for the future. Great, thank you for that. Nini, any thoughts on that?
I think it's all been covered by the panel, but
Okay.
The different kinds of training that we've seen emerge throughout the pandemic is more sort of personalized modular training, sort of the stuff that Nick was saying about it being employer-led, has been crucial.
Great. Okay, that leads us to the next slide. That certainly people have spotted the fact they're going to need new kit, new ways of working, and 72% here of businesses up their tech tools training and their talent investment in 2020. And this is an average increase of 1.4 million for companies, which is huge when you consider that across the UK. However, the box next to it, just 9% of companies have trained all relevant staff to use all the technologies they invested in. So there is a knowledge gap amongst employees, and only 27% of this IT decision makers, people in charge of those projects, people in charge of actually buying the kit, are satisfied with their workers' abilities to use the various technologies. And as you can see, nearly 2/3 say they'll be reviewing their tech training strategy this year. And again, 2/3 of workers view the training they get on their tech kit as an important employee incentive, backing up what we were just talking about. Is this a new thing, do you think, of buying kit and then we need to actually train everybody? Is that something you often see, Beth, in companies you work with?
Yeah, I would say so. And I'm interested in the 9% of companies that have trained. As to Nimi's point, training comes in all different sort of shapes and sizes. So is it training as they think they have been on a formal course or done a formal piece of e-learning, or is it training kind of through collaboration and through trying and experimentation? Because we see a heck of a lot of that. But yeah, I would say it's a pretty common problem, and obviously technology moves so quickly I'm sure we'll come to this later about finding the time to keep skills up to date, is another sort of tricky problem to wrangle. But yeah, it's not uncommon, but it's also, I think, a pressing time issue, and it's just at times almost impossible to keep up with the pace of technology updates.
Yeah, and it must be infuriating to FDs across the country. Like, well, we spent all that money last year, and haven't we solved that problem now? No,
yeah,
it's continually moving, isn't it? And that's the infuriating and exciting thing about working in this particular industry sector. I think you bring to bear an interesting point as well, that not only are we seeing different ways of having to train remotely and things like that, but there is a diversity issue on training. Personalities train or learn in different ways, don't they? So I think it's important to accommodate that as well. And it's something I touch upon later, actually, about the importance of having a diverse training team or a diverse training scheme. So you have the different ways of learning represented in your training team, or external trainers that come in. So you're potentially involving the entire working community, rather than just the people that like presentation training or something like that. So that's an important point as well. Okay, interesting. So the next slide. What are you seeing? What trends are you seeing, Nimi, as far as how we are doing it at the moment? What's coming to the fore?
I think a lot of tech businesses so far have been focusing on economic recovery, and that is essentially looking at their staff and looking at their access to talent concerns and focusing in and trying to close those gaps. In my opinion, 9% is so low, and it was actually shocking when I read the research that only 9% of businesses are actively training for the tech that they've already purchased. You know, it is a large commitment, and so we need to do more. I think everything that Beth said in terms of how costs can affect this, you know, companies need to overcome this challenge, and I think the ways in which we can do that is by installing a culture of lifelong learning, really focusing in on the fact that learning never stops. Even when you've gotten the job that you want, it continues, and that comes from company culture and the training elements of it.
It's a peculiarly British thing as well, isn't it? This kind of resistance on lifelong learning, because if you look at the way the Germans do it, it's kind of an accepted thing. If you're above a certain level, you will continually go back, relearn stuff, the latest thinking. And I think it's. Well, sorry, Nimi.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's previously the training and the skills that have been needed in the UK landscape have been different. So we saw kind of the increase of the need for softer skills, and now we're looking at hybrid skills in terms of kind of the collaboration, but also the use of collaboration tools online, which can be a little bit more daunting and a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, Nick, do you see a resistance with clients to commit to training? Is there a bit like, well, surely I'm paying them a lot of money, surely they should know how to use these things?
Well, yes, I'm in danger of opening a can of worms by commenting on this, because I know we're guilty, but I think the figure of 27% of it was IT heads, you know, don't feel their staff are trained on it. The problem is I don't think we've lost that connection where they work closely with their staff, and is the equipment they're buying the equipment they want because they think it's best in practice or what they need, and actually their staff think, yeah, well, that's nice to have, but it's not what I need to actually do my job and improve our system or platform. And I think that's reflective in only 9% of them being trained on it, because I think, you know, training's it's a two-way street. You can't prescribe an experienced technologist a load of training if they don't feel like it'll benefit their career. And I think that it's really important. Like, that's why, you know, we're massive with talking to clients around paired programming and continual learning and continual integration when they're doing development, because it's very much a collaborative training process. And I think a lot of that's been lost in lockdown, because, as Beth touched on, there's huge amounts of training that goes on, that has gone on, that potentially doesn't go under the guise of training because it happens day to day in the office. It's a quick grab someone at a quick moment around a whiteboard, or they quickly sit down and thrash out some code and fix a problem or a bug. And I think, like, we've lost that over the last year. And I think now training's come to the fore because there is that gap where possibly it was resolved on a day-to-day basis, but now is like, actually, we need some training because we're not capable of delivering that project or that whatever we've decided we're going to do. And so now there's like, oh, it must be a training issue. I think it's actually just it's an interaction issue. And I think a lot of the time it's making sure that those opportunities are still available when people are working from home, keeping communication lines open, keeping that flow of information up and down.
Yeah, accessibility. I mean, you're absolutely spot on that desk side point where somebody says, I'm just at a dead end with this, I don't know what to do. And you hit exactly whilst the iron is hot, as it were. And that really embeds in how somebody then goes forward and works, doesn't it? And we've definitely lost that. As much as those kind of water cooler moments where a light bulb goes on and you think, hang on a minute, if I got those people involved. So yeah, definitely one of the downsides of remote working. So that's interesting. You said paired programming. What does that mean, Nick? Just to the uninitiated like myself.
So it's basically where technologists sit down together and they solve an issue as they run through it, as they're writing code together, and they get to comment on each other's code, how it looks, issues they might come across, rather than being prescribed and going, right, here's your job, go off and do it, deliver it. You develop your code, you put it into the build process, and then you suddenly panic because it doesn't work or doesn't quite work with the rest of the team. It's sort of a continuous development process where you're coding together, critiquing each other's code. Great for learning, especially for younger developers or senior developers.
Mm-hmm.
It's an amazing training opportunity, which like that hasn't had, we haven't had that ability. I mean, in our industry, which is not just tech focused, you can see it just from our sales staff and our support staff. They don't have those opportunities to learn on the desk. And I think that's going to be a major issue as people go back to the office. They're probably haven't going to be regress, but they just haven't had those opportunities to grow on a continual basis, which things like paired programming allow you to do.
Okay, that's some interesting points. So
but if I can just add, sorry, Don, if I could add one point to that, I was going to say, I completely agree in that isolation of individuals was sort of the main impact, certainly, that we saw. I guess the key now is making training, and it's a bit of a buzzword, but I'll say it anyway, making training in the flow of work. So it just feels like it's part of your job. It's not necessarily a thing that you go and do, or a course that you would go and spend 5 days out of the office on. It just happens through the flow of work, and it feels a natural thing. So as Nick says, whether it's paired programming or whether it's sort of something that you come together as a community and just do, or group sharing or problem solving or whatever it may be, it doesn't necessarily feel like training. It's just something that you do in your job, and that has been probably a bit of a change that we've had to try, I guess, an influence, and also have to enable within, I guess, the leadership and the management structures within our organisation. So it feels kind of something a bit different, rather than something that happens in isolation, that it happens as part of the day-to-day work that just happens.
Yeah, and because most companies are incredibly data-led, aren't they? It's very, very difficult to quantify that, isn't it? So it's not something you can allocate a resource to and say, well, we spent this amount of money. It's happening in the background, but it's such an incredible cultural. Once that's embedded in your culture, the win you get from that is massive, because everybody's expecting to learn something. Nobody's expecting to stand still. Change is the constant, and increasing your skills is the constant. So I think there's some huge benefits from that, but it's not as it's not a poster that you can hammer up there and say we spent this and we got this return, because it's evolving in the background all the time.
Yeah, I think the danger to as better is that businesses look at it and go, right, we have to train our staff on X, Y, or Z, and it becomes too much of a, like, everyone needs to do it, rather than, as Beth said, it needs to be something that is just seen as part of your job. It's an ongoing basis. You don't need to set specific time aside, like this is a training process. No, it's not. It's part of your job. As you're developing and improving and doing code reviews, like that's kind of part of your job. And I think it's almost that danger of going, right, we need to get an external trainer in to upskill our staff, and that's going to obviously increase costs, reduce efficiency, take away time from their day jobs. And I think it's making sure you get that balance right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ben,
Dom.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, and also I guess from our perspective, I know it's front and centre on everything that a potential candidate will ask, absolutely. But it's also front and centre for us that we recruit people with that innate curiosity and that learning agility as well, that they see that, and also we see that in them. Otherwise, they're just probably not going to keep up in the nicest possible way with the changes that they're going to be presented with. So that's something, as much as we need to deliver, we also need to look for that in people that are seeking to join us.
Yeah, it kind of ties into one of the thoughts that I had about it when Nick was talking there, in that if you do call upon trainers every single time you come across a difficult situation, there is that, it's a stuttering performance, isn't it? Because, oh, I need some training on this before I can advance this. Whereas if you're continually, as you're saying, have that intellectual curiosity, you're trying to find solutions from your local community within the office or remotely, if you know who to call, that's self-generating, isn't it? Rather than waiting for the training session before I can actually get past this obstacle in the way of completing a project or whatever. Okay, some fascinating points on that actually, about both business culture and the way our expectations, I suppose, within the business of how we're going to learn. So if we look at the top 3 tech training challenges, one important stat that came as a surprise was that only a fraction of companies have trained up employees to use the tech systems, which we've spoken about, and that's why the training is so important. But why is that so low? When we asked them in our survey, the Tackling Tech Training, the majority said that showing trainees how to use technology whilst working remotely, keeping employees engaged, and ensuring trainees read all the follow-up materials and carry out follow-up actions are their biggest challenges. And I certainly have been guilty of maybe not reading all of the documentation after a training session. Full disclosure there. These factors highlight the importance of motivating employees and giving a reason really why the training is happening, what they can gain from it. Thinking creatively about how to structure those sessions, and really making sure that employees feel enabled to take time out and complete their training properly. We had it was legislative training recently. It was done at such a pace that I did wonder, in that hour and a half, it was like literally downloading the King James Bible in an hour and a half. And you just wonder how long that's going to remain in your memory for. And again, it goes back to what we've been talking about. It's got to mean something. It's got to have a value, and it's got to have an obvious value. If again, to quote Nick on the tick box exercise, there's a certain amount of cynicism which comes with that, and people treat the training accordingly, I think. Luckily, though, over the last year, 1/5 of companies said they've tried to be more creative and engaging with training for tech workers. So virtual training sessions, making training more in depth for tech workers. But there's a lot to be done. This points to the fact that tech training isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, as we've spoken about, and understanding what type of training works best to train both tech and non-tech workers can lead to increased adoption and commitment from employees. And I think this is where that diverse training team, external training team, or different training companies can really come into play, because it will resonate more strongly with different sectors of your workforce. Are these the kind of challenges that you faced when you speak to clients, Nick, in this area?
I slightly cringe at the last point on the ensuring trainees read and follow up. I feel like they're going back to school. The second bit's really important in terms of carry out follow-up actions. Like, that's really important, but I feel like training has to be a really engaged and process where they're getting involved in it. And I think the danger comes when people say this is generally that it will be prescribed training. If you're sending, make sure you read up your follow-up material, as you mentioned, your training, none of that will stick with them going forward. I think the best type of training is, I get the first point, they definitely struggle with how do you engage people remotely, and also how do you get everyone involved. That's really tough. But I think if, wherever possible, it is employee-led a lot of the training, you're going to get a much higher engagement rate. And I think the really important bit is the follow-up actions. And I mentioned the paired program, which is harder to do when you're at home. Potentially, it's just a bit more onerous. But where you've got people working together on projects and wherever possible, we're kind of talking two ends of the spectrum. We've got senior people that are trying to upskill, get better, but at the same time, you could have very junior people who are only entering the market for the first time and need a lot of ground level training, which that will be more applicable for. And also, you're trying to fill that skill gap, as you mentioned at the start, Dom, of people that have done something else in a switching industry. So there's a fine balance. I think making sure that they really think like one size doesn't fit all, and that it's very tailored towards their staff and who they're trying to engage with, and then that will give them the ability to attract better talent as well. Because if it is just this is the process, we'll send you your homework, we'll follow up next week, well done, that's going to work that, and it has to be a more interactive process that is tailored for the level of people they're trying to engage with as well.
I love that point, actually, that if you are relying on people to read all the material, there's probably something that's missing in your training, and it's probably not resonating strongly with the people you are training, or not relevant to them. You certainly seem focused on that kind of immediacy of the relevancy and how we're going to get involved in it. And if not, creating a project or a topic for them to really utilize those skills, rather than, oh, thank God we've got that out of the way. Everybody knows how to use, I'm making it up, mural collaboration tool. Well, no, let's collaborate on a question we've got and see how that actually works. So I think that's really interesting. How about yourself, Beth? Do you think similar to that, or are the reading materials are afterwards the most vital part of the training?
Well, the dusty shelves behind me probably have a load of old manuals from things that I went on 10 years ago, to be honest, and never read. So yeah, I mean, the point I would want to make really in the last 12 sort of 14 months, I think how we think about training as a profession perspective has been revolutionized. I think gone are the days when I will ever ask anybody in our organization to sit on a train for 2 hours, to then sit in a classroom and watch a death by PowerPoint slide and listen to a trainer for maybe 3 days and then come back on another 2-hour train journey. So we've learned so much about what is possible. We've learned so much about the science behind how people learn and the psychology around doing remote delivery, around what difference does it make for people to have their cameras on, when does it work, when does it not, how long really can you run an online session for before people just can't take any more in. So the whole pace and the complexity about how we learn and how we engage and the differences in how people do that has just, I mean, we always kind of did extended classrooms and things like that where you could dial in from home. We've always been really flexible as an organisation, but this has just kind of sped that up probably about tenfold in how we do that now, and I don't think we will ever go back. One thing I would say, and it sort of also I think builds on Nick's point, is this it's not about follow-up materials for me, it's about giving people some safe places to go away and practice. And there's a lot of cool stuff now in tech. There's a lot of sandpit environments that come with certain digital learning providers where you can do and watch the video and read the material and then immediately spin up a lab where you can have a little practice and you can fail in a safe place without breaking anything or doing any damage, and then immediately learn from that. So I think we just need to leverage what tech has enabled for us and also how we've learned in the last 12 to 14 months in having to just change. We had to do it, and we've proved that we can. I think we've learned so much from that. We just need to continue to do that and continue to evolve the way we think about this.
Good points. Good points. Nimi, does that echo what you're seeing? What you're seeing more generally from the community you work with?
Yeah. So techUK members have obviously, throughout this pandemic, tried to engage employees more, because how can you convince someone to take time out of their day to do training? Now, before it was a lot easier in person, now we're doing it remotely, and it's all about the transparency. So coming down from your CEO or your line manager, seeing that other people are in the same space that you are, learning the same things, to forward your work to see how it actually affects you and going forward. For some organizations, this is, blocking out half a day to do a specific kind of training. For some teams, it's all about sort of modular learning, where you do a course online that can be done at your own pace, that can be sort of tailored to you. It really does depend on kind of the teams and the culture and the environment.
Yeah, it's a bespoke thing, isn't it? It's not, certainly not one size fits all. If we go to the next slide, I feel as though that a lot of this we've talked about already. Is there any peculiarities that you've seen, Nick, with clients, that any specific, no client names involved, obviously, but any issues that which you've really seen to be the most intractable, and the ones that if you can solve, you get great benefit from what you've seen in the last 12, 14 months?
No, I suppose Beth said very well of where we've come from as an industry, of how we view training, and I think having the ability to, straight after a session, dial in and being able to practice what you've just been taught immediately, with no fear of retribution, not worrying about breaking any systems, hopefully not having too many judgy colleagues in there at the same time, but being able to have that interaction, like where businesses have set up those little safe bubbles where people have learned, they get far more engagement, they get a much better take up on the next training course. Because let's be honest, as soon as you announce training, I know we do it as a business, is the first group go, and as they come out, everyone goes, what was that like? And they're like, no, rubbish. So everyone holidays as fast as they can. But as soon as you do a training course that is good, or they view as being really beneficial, they all talk about it. Everyone's then talking about like what training's coming next, or what's happening for different levels. And I think that whichever form of training you're trying to roll out, wherever you can make it real time, engaging, immediate feedback, like that, those are the businesses that tend to have the biggest take up and the highest interaction rate of their technical staff.
We chatted about one of the questions, which is about not prejudicing yourself by exposing the fact you're feeling you need some training. And I suppose that points to, and Beth, you made the point of people feeling safe to put their hand up and go, I need some training, please. But from what you're saying, Nick, it's very much a cultural issue, because that's the expectation of the business culture of a particular company, that people feel safe, and that comes from the top, I suppose. Is that, do you see that, Beth? Do you see companies where it's kind of almost strangulated from the top because people must not allow themselves to be exposed as requiring training?
It's not something that I see, but it's something that I can appreciate and understand that it does happen. I think, as I said, it's about enabling it in your culture, really, so people don't feel that that's something that they might face, and that it's also available. So we try and make available to people. Again, we don't necessarily prescribe, but because there's so many different technology areas that we cover, we supply sort of a wide range of options for people to learn. So whether that's some digital online learning through various different providers that we have, depending on your specialty, or whether that be through some lab practice areas, that almost you don't really need to go and ask permission, because it's just there when you need it. That's kind of how I would see as a way of kind of getting around that. As I said, my main challenge that we've faced is certainly the isolation, and I still recognise there are some things that just work better when people can collaborate when they're in the same spaces, especially things where you want to do something quite creative, quite free thinking, or perhaps really look at a sticky problem. Those things undoubtedly, I think, do benefit from some in-person collaboration.
I think it's a big thing, Dom, as well, with if you're in an environment where you feel that you're going to be prejudiced against because you want to upskill and improve yourself, which ultimately is going to help your business, then that's definitely more a cultural issue than there's a balance of like not going, well, I quite fancy some training on something completely left field that isn't going to benefit me. I think like asking for training, it's a bit like or proposing training, it's a bit like a business case. Like, but you're in an environment that should probably listen to that and might go, not this time, we'll do it next time. But I think there's a cultural issue if you're concerned that you're going to face a bit of prejudice or retribution because you're asking to better yourself, which ultimately the business will benefit from.
Yeah, Yeah, that's another good point. Let's go to the second poll. So what is the main tech training method your company uses? We've got employee-led training, instructor-led training, drop-in training sessions, digital boot camps, or apprenticeships. What is the panel saying on that? Oh, sorry, the panel, the audience rather, saying on that. Employee-led training, okay. And it comes as no surprise, actually, that apprenticeships is down as absolute zero. Drop-in training sessions, obviously very difficult in the remote environment. Instructor-led training, but instructor-led training being behind employee-led training. And from the discussion we've had, that kind of whiteboard moment or desk side training, you know, when you look at that potentially being 50% of where people benefit, that's a huge potential loss or real difficulty. Okay, so again, that's pretty interesting. When we look at building fit for purpose tech training programs, these are the points that we think are, from a CW Jobs point of view, are really important. Regularly rethinking the recruitment process, make sure it omits bias, encourages diversity for the points we've spoken about, successfully identifies the core characteristics of your business needs, and as we've heard loud and clear, incorporate your training offering into job ads. It's something up there which should be up there with salary. It should be a key element. It helps attract a more diverse range of talent, people that maybe aren't quite there, but could potentially be a huge asset to your company. Tailoring training to the skills required for those that need them. Constantly reviewing where the gaps are and how you can fill them, whether it's a bootcamp or module program. Providers and experts are always on hand, either externally or internally, to provide those solutions. It's about the questions. The answers are there. It's about asking the questions. Soft skills were mentioned earlier. Certainly amalgamating companies requires business analysis to be very accepting and understanding of different points of view. So that can really facilitate integration of other companies, and maybe they are more highly skilled in other areas than you are. And as we've heard, a continually changing landscape, so continuously reflect on your tech training. Make sure it's fit for purpose, up to scratch. So they're the points that we'd really put out there as hiring tips. So we're just going to go into one last poll, and then there'll be the questions. So if we just jump into the last poll, what would make it easier to implement training in your company? Is it senior management support that's the real blocker? Is it communication to your employees? Is it difficult to get everybody in on a call at the same time? Increased training budget is the issue, just throwing money at it, or is it about the time allocated for the training? So it's about the time, yeah. And I think with the pressures over the last year, allowing people to come away from the business of making money or building the products, building the things that you sell, that time has been really difficult to allocate. So it seems as though we would like more of that, which is a simple thing, but can obviously be difficult to carve out when you're in such a pressurized situation, which is what COVID has put upon us. So thanks for everybody's interaction on those polls today. We'll move to the questions and answers. I was going to run through some of the stuff that's been sent through. So whilst I'm looking at that, Charlie, do we have any questions through today?
We do. Let me just bring up the first one.
Okay.
Okay, so our first question is, let me bring it up. Sorry, they're all popping up. How is the panel seeing organisations enable tech training? We're moving to online, self-based before the pandemic, which then cemented that move. How do we keep that training method effective?
Who'd like to take that question first?
Well, I'll have a go at that. I'll start if you like. So absolutely, I agree, first of all, that yes, it was always prevalent. And as I said, the pace of sort of moving to digital solutions and online learning has hugely increased. And it's also been a bit of a godsend, really, for our organisation, in that it's enabled training to continue, even when we were all separated and isolated. I think it's also quite a fast moving market, online learning and training, and there are always new things that are evolving. So I would say my recommendation would be keep up to date with what's available in the market, and keep refreshing what you've got in your offer, because there's some really cool things that are always changing, and are always new ways kind of to engage people in your organisation with that learning. And then finally, I'd go back to how do we keep it alive? It's really, again, a cultural thing, down to the leadership and the managers that you have in your organisation, in making sure that it happens, that it's used, that it's discussed, that it happens in the flow of work, it's part of the day-to-day work. We've recently started to build that into our regular quarterly Connect conversations that we have, which is kind of our performance management, where every time a manager and the employee come together, they talk about what have they learned over the last quarter and what are they going to learn next. So again, looking at how you can bake it into kind of your day-to-day processes, so it just happens rather than it's a thing that you're constantly trying to push.
So there's a real expectation, Beth, on asking that question every quarter. People have it front of mind all the time. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, well, I would say that at the start of that question was pre-pandemic, we were only just starting to do more digital online training. So it is still relatively new. I know it's accelerated and it's happening. As an organisation, is just making sure you don't set anything in stone that, okay, that works, we'll stick with that. It's constantly changing. So I think updating it and getting feedback and making sure you're staying relevant is very important. And I think, as Beth said, it's one of those things that it's got to be driven from the top down, but it's got to be sort of embedded in the organisation that this is what we do, this is how we improve our staff, this is how, as a business, culturally, this is how we're going forward. And I think if it's always spoken about, it becomes embedded quickly in a business culture.
Yeah. Nimi, any thoughts on that, or has it been covered, do you think?
Definitely agree with what both Beth and Nick have said. It's got to come from senior leadership, but also reinforced at every stage of kind of, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. And in terms of time allocation being one of the core reasons why people find training difficult, if it comes from leadership, they will make it a priority within the business day, or however long the training is lasting. So again, it comes back to good training is always flexible, and it ebbs and flows.
Good, thanks for that. One of the points, and hence my comment, my barbed comment about the apprenticeships, is that apprenticeships just really don't seem to have taken off, do they? How can we change that? And one of the questions that was sent through, how does the IT industry need to adapt to improve the uptake and use of the apprenticeship scheme? What's the issues with it? Nimi, to start with you on that, really, because obviously it was launched to great hurrah 2-3 years ago, and on the face of it, seemed to be a really good idea. Money will be taken off of you, reinvest that back into your teams.
Yeah, so there are a number of issues with the apprenticeship levy, but I think a lot of businesses who pay into the apprenticeship levy can't use the funds, can't access it in different ways, because the apprenticeship funding module is very inflexible. It's very strict. You have to adhere by certain training providers. Another thing is that organizations also don't know that the government will fund your apprenticeship if you are an SME, if you meet certain requirements. There's a lot of information out there. It's not being consolidated. We are seeing, the consultation on perhaps flexible apprenticeships, I think apprenticeships are a really good way to train your workforce, but they do take a lot of time commitment. And certain organizations have said sort of the 20% off the job training can be quite tough. Those are all problems that we can essentially solve. And I think it starts with the cultural aspect, you know, offering apprenticeships if you see that this is a really good way to upskill your workforce. You know, right now there are other more flexible options open, such as kind of digital boot camps, employer-led training. But what can we do to support people at all skill levels of all ages to look at apprenticeships and say that is a way that I would like to train and focus on?
Okay, any other thoughts on the apprenticeship scheme or the apprenticeship levy? Beth, as a very large company, have you managed to use that to advantage, or has it been too tricky to really get involved with?
No, so we spend a decent proportion of our levy, and we also have recently run a scheme where we're gifting some of our levy back to small organisations also as part of an approach. So we have had the largest number of applications for a range of apprenticeship opportunities, and we also run an upskillers program, so apprenticeships for existing employees also. So we do a lot of it. I would say, how can we do more? It really, it's back to what sort of Nimi said about the flexibility that's needed within the frameworks to adapt and build those programs at the pace that employers like ourselves need. And I know that it's a tough ask because tech moves so fast. So as soon as a framework is done and released, it's almost out of date in what's in it for an employer. And then an employer will look at that and think, well, I've got to top that up because I'm not getting X, Y, or Z in what I need for my person on that program. I don't have the answer in how we completely resolve it, but it's certainly we're making best use of it as we possibly can, but we're certainly not 100% utilising what we pay in.
But I think one of the points missed, one of the potential positives missed, is that you can, with D&I being so important, it's a way of really reshaping the intake because there's obviously a larger talent pool. But it just needs that commitment for longer term training, doesn't it? To be able to bolster those people that you do bring in, either gender, race, or whatever. It needs that commitment to it. Nick, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we have very few, if any, clients that really take up the apprenticeship scheme, and I don't know whether, I'm not 100% sure why, but I think it potentially is the stigma around, as Beth said, it's quite a fixed approach where, you know, technology is always pushing that we're agile, we're diverse, we can move with change with times, and whether actually what it needs is a bit of a rebranding piece of what it is, and not, you know, where apprenticeships are traditionally successful are in industries that are a little bit more prescribed, and engineering, you know, machine engineering and carpentry, whatever it might be, is like slightly more suited to that. And I think that potentially a rebranding of a digital boot camp type thing would be interesting, although I can't wrap down my mind digital boot camps. We're seeing techies running around with computers doing press ups and sit ups, sort of Joe Wick stuff. But I think there's probably an exercise, or there's definitely time needed to look at what would suit the tech industry a little bit better than an apprenticeship. I think the stigma around apprenticeship means organisations think it's just set in stone.
I was going to say PR around apprenticeships, but I think you're absolutely spot on. It's a branding issue, and the word apprenticeship has a certain resonance, doesn't it, of being a 14-year-old following a master mason round for 10 years and you know, finally being able to lay a block, as it were. You know, from times gone by, but and more recently in the engineering side, and it simply doesn't have that dynamism, doesn't sound that dynamism, which is what, to Beth's point, is being demanded from companies. Because we need those skills to be online or available to us in 6-9 months, not a 2-year program. So that's interesting. If anybody's listening from the government, then that'd be great to see a rethink on that. Charlie, any other questions that you think would be? I've got plenty here, but we're running out of time, as is the curse of webinars, as it were.
Yeah, I've got one more. If read out from the audience.
Great.
This one is: any views on incorporating desirable difficulty in tech training? I've been on so many tech courses where the hands-on element is step by step. You get to the end of the lab and doesn't feel like you've had to use your brain.
Right, so almost kind of training by numbers, but it's not really stretching the attendees.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've seen some great things done. I'll have to name drop our friends in AWS. AWS run game days, which are fantastic. Which is pits team against team to come to. I can't remember the outcome. Whether it's I think you've got to spin up various different things, obviously using their cloud platform, solve challenges that get thrown at you as a team across the day. And then come up with solutions on the fly. It's in a simulation. It's really fast moving. There are multiple different ways to solve the problem, so it's definitely not paint by numbers. Those guys absolutely had it nailed. So sim type training, I think, is really powerful when done really well, and that certainly isn't paint by numbers. And if you haven't had the chance to do an AWS game day, I'll give them a promotion on this webinar. They're fantastic, and more of that. I would say we've done other sims that are around cyber attacks and things like that. There's no better way to learn, I think, than being completely immersed in something.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Nili, are you seeing trends on this in terms of training is being dumbed down too much, or it's just not challenging enough, and therefore, so I think there's that excitement piece, isn't it? If adrenaline's flowing and you're thinking, oh, I might get caught out on this, chances are that you're going to remember the experience for longer.
Yeah, I think the issue of engaging content in training has been around since kind of training existed. What we're seeing is how can this engaging training being taken online, how can we make it digitized, and how can we make it work is a whole nother question, and Beth spoken at length about the successes and failures of that.
Good, as well framed actually, that it has been there forever, and it's about actually the questions about how we do this online. Nick, any final thoughts on that?
You couldn't have worse feedback, could you? If you put a training course on that I didn't engage my brain. Have this big cross the box.
Please read the materials.
Be quick and move. But I think as Beth and Nimi both said, I think it just needs to be, it's constantly changing, making sure that you're picking the right training for the right level of person, and definitely not dumbing it down. You want to challenge them. You want them coming out thinking, that was amazing, I've got more to do, I've got more to offer, when's the next one? Not going, that was a waste of time and I didn't engage my brain. I mean, that's, I'd say, a mismatch of what course has been offered to what level of person.
Yeah, and speaks of maybe a little, well, dangerous to say, but maybe a little bit of laziness on the part of just rolling out the same program time and time again without updating it. Okay. One of the questions that was sent through was, do you think onboarding training is an HR matter or a matter for department leads? And the whole induction piece we haven't touched upon because it's slightly different. But I suppose a bigger question is, who should be running the training agenda? Is it HR? Is it a training department? But a lot of companies don't have training departments. Or is it the COO who needs to drive that? Or is it actually department leads who need to put their hands up? Where have you seen it most effective? Nick, if we start with you, maybe in some of the smaller companies that don't have these huge budgets to have 10 people in the training department.
So I think the error is almost in the question. Like, I don't think it's solely one division's responsibility. I think that's where it falls down. If you give responsibility to HR to administer training, pick it, inevitably the heads of department aren't going to think it's the right training. If the heads of department pick it, it tends to be the stuff they're interested in and might not be what is better for the wider organization. I think the important bit is, like, they all need to have an input in it. And I think that without that, and without them, heads of departments highlighting maybe skills shortages, gaps, from feedback in their teams, HR department having a more holistic view on a business in a big organization, saying these are what we're seeing as issues we need to improve on. And smaller organizations, again, is you're in danger of a CEO made decision of this is what you're getting training on, and no one engages with it. So I think it's not an individual department issue. It's a like you all need to take this seriously if you want to embed it in your culture and make a decision as a team. This is what we see is going to, you almost need like a little subcommittee, right? This is what we need as training. These will be the constant feedbacks. These are the people that, are in charge of that. And I think if you've got that, then you've got buy-in from all levels and all departments.
Yeah, I'm really getting a flavour of the kind of pace of clients you work with in terms of that startup mentality, and things have got to move at pace and they've got to be relevant because we can't afford to be wasting a penny. Great. Nimi, any thoughts on that? I think it's quite a cohesive answer by Nick.
Yeah, I want to take Nick's answer. I think
okay.
that the collaboration needed to look at the training needs within an organization is so vital. It's almost as vital as getting the feedback after a training. So that kind of rolling just feedback and implementation of what the skills needs may be.
Great. Beth, any final thoughts maybe in the larger company and the realities of a larger company and instigating that?
Yeah, sure. But that question, is it HR and matter department? It's everybody's responsibility. We provide a platform, and onboarding for us starts the moment that someone accepts the offer. So runs throughout whatever notice period they have. We have a great platform that does that, but we have some set steps within that to cover sort of the corporate stuff that we need to cover. But then it's also tailored by those individual departments, and we equip the managers to be able to use that platform to send the information that they need to hook the individual up with a buddy, to make sure everything's going to run smoothly from their first day right through to their first 3 months. So we'll enable it, but absolutely they have skin in the game also to make it really be an engaging and useful experience.
Great, nicely put. The last answer today. We're on 10:31, so I don't want to impinge upon other people's times. I know there's probably many Teams calls about to kick in, so it just remains for me to thank everybody who's attended today, but in particular to the panel that have helped me navigate this interesting area, an interesting and vital area for business. So Nick, Nimi, Beth, thank you very much for your time today. I hope it's been useful to everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
Dom.
you.
Thanks, Dom.